Hello, my name is Diann Schindler. You are listening to In the Know. This podcast show includes writing tips, travel tips, and my views of life from savvy and thoughtful to quirky and humorous. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of 2020. It's going to be a great year. It's going to be an exciting interview, too. I have Paula Stone Tucker, an award-winning author. Tucker was just 30 yards in front of the National Guard when they fired into a crowd of students on May 4th, 1970 at Kent State University. A retired clinical psychologist, she worked with families, couples, and survivors of trauma and abuse. In her younger days, she was a reporter for the Akron Beacon Journal and the Daily Kent Stater. She grew up in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, and graduated from Kent State University. And now she splits her time between Northeast Ohio and the villages in Florida, where she writes, she plays the flute, and she says she's learning to play golf. Her first book, and what we're going to be talking about today, her first book is entitled Surviving, a Kent State Memoir. It is the Silver Medal Award winner in the Memoir and Biography category of the Florida Writers Association 2019 Literary Award Competition. Quite an impressive bio, Paula. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Diann.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad to meet you.
Yes, I'm happy to be here too.
And you and I hail from the same state of Ohio, so this is like we definitely have to meet in person at some point.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
Paula,
that would be great.
Yeah, so Paula, I'm here in Amelia Island, Florida, and Paula is at a remote location at the Villages. So we're really happy that she could join us today. So we have a series of wonderful questions that are just going to bring out all the wonderful work that Paula has done. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like you said, I was standing 30 yards in front of the Ohio National Guard when they fired into a crowd of students on May 4th in 1970. The way I got there is that I was born in Ohio and I grew up outside of Akron, and then I went to Kent State. Since then, I've lived in Northern California for almost 25 years, and lately I've been living in the Villages in Florida.
That is fantastic. I'm coming to the Villages. I'm looking forward to meeting you there in February. Great. So tell us about your writing journey. I mentioned in your bio that you have experience in journalism. So how did you come to write this book?
Well, my life has been unusual. So when people hear me tell my story, they say, you should write a book. And finally, after my parents died, I did write a book. But I had to learn how to write differently than I'd learned as a journalist. And so that took quite a while. That took about 5 years to learn how to write in an interesting way. And so the first book I wrote was about my life and my experiences at Kent State.
And so the difference, I just wanted to ask you another question about the difference between writing as a journalist and writing a memoir. What was different about that?
Well, of course, I went to school back in the 1960s, like another century. And back then, we were taught to leave emotion out of our writing and to just present facts as they were told to us by whoever it was that we were interviewing. So what I needed to learn was how to put emotion in my writing so that people would be interested in it.
So tell us about your book.
Well, I started out as a really naive Catholic high school graduate. Uh, Went to Catholic school for 12 years, and high school was at an all-girls school. I thought I wanted to join the convent, so I applied, and I was rejected. I was told that I was too immature and that I should go to college for a year and then reapply. Well, that's what I did. I first of all had to work for a year to save up money, and then I went to Kent State. The first month I was there, I met a boy who seemed interesting, and I forgot all about the convent. Uh, so, this is the story of our life. And when we were seniors at Kent State, in our very last month there, uh, that was when the May 4th shootings occurred. And I was present for those. I was on campus that day selling, uh, or taking orders for the yearbook. And the yearbook and the newspaper office were in the building that the guard marched around to follow students they were chasing off of the commons.
That had to be the most frightening experience. I mean, I remember it receiving international attention. I mean, there are a lot of people, or listeners, I assume, that may not even know much about the Kent event. Can you give us a brief overview of that?
Well, sure. To start off, it was the night of April 30th, the President Nixon, announced that there would be an incursion of United States troops into Cambodia. Raised a lot of concern among people that were against the war, and a lot of the people on college campuses were against the war. They demonstrated Thursday night, Friday night, and there were some little incidents in town. In the town of Kent was very small and had basically maybe a 4-block area where people went to bars on the weekend. So anyway, there were incidents on Friday night where trash cans were lit on fire and there were some windows broken. And of course, the people in the town were outraged about that. But the students persisted, and in their anti-war activities. And so there were some demonstrations on Saturday night, and at one of the demonstrations on Saturday night, someone threw maybe a Molotov cocktail or something that was lit, and it started one of the ROTC buildings on fire, and that building burned to the ground. And at that point, the National Guard, the Ohio National Guard, was called into Kent. And so I was present on Saturday night.
Were you involved in that demonstration on Saturday night yourself?
Well, I followed the people marched around campus and gathered as many students as they could. And so I was following that group around campus until they got to the commons, and I stayed there and watched. Yeah. And I was married at the time, and I was with my husband. And he was a reporter for the student radio station. And so he was recording what was going on.
Did you sense the level of danger at that moment or no?
No, actually, it was more like a carnival atmosphere. The month of April had been horrible. As you know, in Ohio, it can be freezing and cold and sleeting in April. And it had been like that up until the first day of May. And then the temperature went up to 70 and the sun came out. And so people were in a excited mood. They had, it was an atmosphere like a panty raid where people were happy and laughing and joking.
I wonder, I'm going to have to put a definition in the show notes of what a panty raid is. I know
Right,
what it
I
is.
guess so.
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so continue. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Okay, so then we just went home. We were living off campus. And later on, my husband went back to uh, what we thought would be a demonstration on Sunday night. And indeed, there was a demonstration. People marched around campus and ended up at the front gate of campus. And some of the students were injured by the guards' bayonets, although there's no clear story about how that happened. So uh, that was Sunday night. And then Monday morning, I was supposed to be working, taking reservations for yearbooks. So my husband dropped me off at Taylor Hall, which was the journalism building. And I got out of the car and he yelled to me, "Now don't go to any demonstrations today." And I said, "Oh, I won't." And so I went in and sat in the library at Taylor Hall for about 2.5 hours. It was an extremely boring morning because nobody showed up to reserve their yearbook. Um, Bell on the Commons ringing. And what that usually meant was that they, uh, someone was calling people to gather on the Commons. So I thought, well, I've got to go out there and see what's going on. And there had been rumors that there was to be a protest, a demonstration on the Commons at noon that day. So I went outside about 11:30, and there were lots of people, maybe hundreds of people, standing on a hill that is at the one end of the Commons that goes up to Taylor Hall, where I was working, and just watched what was going on. And then,
And then is that when the shooting occurred?
well, what happened was, as events ensued, the guard fired some tear gas, and the fumes from the tear gas wafted up the hill, and I got tear gas in my eyes. And so I ran into the building to wash my eyes out. And when I came back, the big crowd that had been on the hill and on the edge of the Commons was gone. Uh, and so I couldn't figure out where they went, looked around the side of the building, and I saw the last of the demonstrators walking over the crest of the hill towards the front of Taylor Hall. And so I walked up that way, and I saw that the guard had gone down the hill and across what's known as the practice football field. Well, they didn't realize that there was a fence on the other side of the practice football field, so they couldn't.
So they couldn't get to they were blocked by this fence?
That's right, yeah. They were blocked by the fence, so they turned around and came back across the football field, and they kind of paused in the middle of the field for uh, a couple minutes, and a couple of them crouched into a kneeling position and lifted their rifles. But
My gosh, that again,
again,
you saw all this. That had
I
to
did.
be, I just can't
Well,
imagine.
really, the atmosphere was more like a carnival or a festival. I certainly didn't think that they had live ammunition in their guns. And I don't think that anyone else did either. Even people I've talked to who were in the military before this incident didn't think that they had ammunition. Anyway, and they started walking back up the hill at the side of Taylor Hall. And I thought they were leaving. And so I was walking down the hill on a path, cement path, and I just kept on walking. And, within a few seconds, I heard pops, and I thought they were firecrackers. I looked over my shoulder, and I could see that some of the guard were kneeling at the top of the hill, and there were puffs of smoke coming from their guns. So I thought, well, that's weird. Why would they be doing that? But I had on a new dress, and I was 5 months pregnant at the time, so I was wearing dresses, and I didn't want to get my dress dirty. And where I was standing was all dirt and sticks and leaves, and so I saw that there was a stairway over at the entrance to Taylor Hall. So I walked over there and lay down on the steps. Just about the time that I got to the steps, they had finished firing. Other people I noticed had hit the dirt. They were laying on the ground. And I thought, well, maybe blanks can hurt you. I thought they were firing blanks. And so finally I lifted my head, and most of the people were still laying on the ground, but some people slowly stood up, and there was a kid in the driveway, maybe 20 feet in front of me, and he was laying flat on his face, and I thought, oh, he tripped. And then I kept watching him, and blood started trickling from his head. So I thought, wow, he really hit his head hard when he tripped. And then I noticed there were other people that were not getting up. And so I started to count, the number of people that were still on the ground. And I would get up to 4 or 5, and I'd think, oh, I didn't register that they had been shot. And then the people that had finally stood up started screaming, some of the women, and rushing to help the people that were still on the ground. And I realized, oh, this is worse than what I thought. And about that time, a student came over and turned the body over that was laying in the driveway, and that was Jeffrey Miller. Well, he was one. There were 4 that were killed. It slowly dawned on me that this was not what I thought it was. It wasn't a festival. It wasn't a carnival, that the guard were shooting people.
It was a very difficult time, almost the tipping point of what was happening in the United States with all kinds of
points. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now, when you and I were putting together the questions, I didn't even ask you that question, and I got to thinking, boy, we want to play by play. I think the readers would want to play by play. So thank you so much for telling us about that. Now, so when you wrote this memoir, who did you write it for, and what made you decide to write it, and why now?
Well, I started out to write it for my family, and then I met some young people in their 20s who said that they did not know anything about the Vietnam era, and that they were reading as many books as they could about Vietnam. And so I realized, well, this is part of that story about Vietnam, and really the Kent State shootings were a pivotal point in the war, where there was probably a balanced sentiment about people that were for the war, people that were against the war. And then when the shootings happened, people started realizing that, oh, they're killing our children.
Yeah, so that really put a separation.
Right, right. And that was one of the impetus to the ending of the war. So anyway, I wrote it because I realized that there had been a few historical books about Kent State, but there wasn't anything that was a personal account.
Mhm. Well, that's fantastic then that you are the first to write the personal account. We appreciate that. Now, what do you think is the central theme or the message for surviving a Kent State memoir?
The memoir is also about my life at Kent State, and it turns out that I was in an abusive relationship, and so theme or message of the book is that you need to find courage within yourself, and that there is hope for people who think they're in an awful predicament and can't figure out how to get out of it.
Well, and that's why you referenced in your information to me as we were emailing back and forth, you said in your email, quote, "Since then, I have had many adventures and misadventures as a single woman." And I was going to ask you what that was about. And so this was about, if I may say so, the abuse that you suffered?
Yeah, and then beyond that, that wasn't long lasting. But just learning how to be a single parent and live in the world on my own uh, led me into a lot of, let's say, missteps and
Mhm.
predicaments.
What do you think is the single most important value that comes out of your book that readers will gain from reading your book?
Well, I hope that an understanding of what probably their parents or grandparents went through. And the other thing for people of my age who are actually interested in the book, people that were in school in the late 60s, early 70s, I think what's important is that this time in history parallels what was going on back then in the late 60s and early 70s. There was a divide in the country, and the divide became so wide that it was possible for people to justify the killing of innocent students on a campus. And so it's kind of a cautionary tale
Mhm.
about what can happen if um, there's no communication across the divide.
Yeah, that's a really good descriptor of what's happening today. What's the best thing that has come to you because of your book, and maybe just because of your writing in general?
The book is brand new, so I hope the best is yet to come. But so far, what's been most important to me is the connection that I've made with readers. And I have two types of people that come up to me and talk to me. One uh, is a group of people that say, "Oh, I went through something similar, and I really relate to your book," and that would be the domestic violence or the abuse part. And
Mhm.
then the other thing that people want to talk about, uh, they want to tell me where they were and what they thought when they heard about Kent State. And so it's similar to when Kennedy was assassinated or when
Mhm.
the 9/11, when the towers fell, that people have an emotional connection to it, and they want to tell you about their emotional connection. So that's very important to me.
Yeah, that's rewarding, I'm sure. Very rewarding for
Hmm.
you. I wanted to let you know that I have two presentations scheduled in February of 2020, both on podcasting. The first presentation is to the writers group at the Villages in Florida on February 12th, and then again to the Amelia Island writers in Fernandina Beach, Florida
on February 25th. Please join me if you're in the area, and note there is no admission fee. Email me at diann@diannabroad.com for more information. And if you'd like for me to speak to your organization on podcasting or writing tips or my international solo nomad travels, please contact me at that same address, diann@diannabroad.com. You can check the episode notes for more contact information. Thank you so much.
Paula, what is the best comment or review you have received? I read your reviews on Amazon, and they're all fantastic, all 5s, good rating. So what's your favorite?
I think my favorite is one that is not up on Amazon yet, and the person that reviewed it said that it was a very heartfelt book, and that meant a lot to me. It meant that it connected with the person who was reading it, and that I was able to get across the emotion that was going on at that point in my life.
So tell me about the Silver Medal Memoir Award from the Florida Writers Association. That's very impressive. Congratulations on that.
Oh, well, thank you. It was a wonderful honor. I was up against the best writers in Florida, and so the award told me that what I wrote was significant, that they thought it was meaningful.
Now, who do you think should read your book?
Well, I would say anybody who wonders about the Vietnam era. And so that would be younger people. What I've been told, I don't know if it's true or not, but that they were not taught about this in history. And so this would be a way of finding out about that. And of course, it would also be meaningful to anybody that's struggling in their own life, that they could identify with somebody else who had struggles and see that they might be able to get through their own.
But I wanted to let our listeners know that in the show notes, in the episode notes for this episode today, I will have a photo of the cover of your book, as well as the link to Amazon so they can buy your book. So people need to make sure to check the show notes. So before we end, I want to ask you what you are working on now. Are you working on another book? Or are you still working on your marketing?
Well, let's say I'm thinking of ideas for my next project right now, and I am working on marketing this book. Yeah.
Good for you. Well, this has been such a pleasure, and thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. I want to make sure that we've covered everything that you want to say. Do you have any final comments before we close?
Well, I just say I have a website. It's paulastonetucker.com with no spaces. And my book is Surviving a Kent State Memoir, and it's available on Amazon.com. And it's also available through Barnes & Noble.
Good, and I will have that information and those links in the program notes. Thank you, Paula Tucker,
well, thank
award-winning
you.
author. Thank you so much. I look forward. I'm going to be in the Villages, and I hope that I get to see you around, I think it's February 12th, somewhere around that time. So
great.
Good chatting with you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you would like to support In the Know, you can do so by subscribing and sharing In the Know with your family and friends. You can like this episode, you can leave a comment, and even add a rating. Your support is very important to our success, and thank you so much for listening. See you next time on In the Know.